Here. It's wonderful to see so many familiar faces. I feel I know almost every one of you, actually. And I have to just repeat over and over again that you have to be the most informed and well-educated docents anywhere in the world. I mean, it's amazing. You could all get up here and give the talks yourselves. I've heard many of you lead tours through the exhibitions, the Mitala, those of you who led the Mitala groups. It was really impressive to hear how you interacted with the audience and your views and your openness, but fundamentally you understood what you were talking about, which is so important. I've been working very closely, the we is with Anne and Larry, and I want to say what a privilege it was to work with both of you to put together this lecture series. We've got 15 amazing speakers, 14, we'll drop me off that one, and covering most of Asian architecture. And this was quite a search. We've brought the speakers from all over. Our speakers aren't local because the fields that we wanted to cover were so esoteric. So do look through the list, and I hope to see you at all of the talks because they really are great. The other thing I wanted to mention, there is a study guide that I think you picked up. And as I had to give the study guide, prepare it weeks in advance, I have to tell you, as I tell my students, that it's no good my giving you all my slides the night before, because I sometimes think of things as I'm driving to school, driving over the bridge or whatever. So, I changed it last night. So, the other thing is I've had to lop off some of the things, so it'll be obvious that I'm not doing the Ajanta caves or the Udayagiri caves either. Okay, so with that, I want to welcome new attendees, people who are new to this lecture series. I hope that you're going to find this really informative and that you'll learn something about Asia generally, from India through Central Asia, China, Korea, Tibet, Southeast Asia, etc. It's a very rich program that we have here. Okay, so the emphasis is on architecture. And we are interested in architecture because we are rebuilding and remodeling our own beautiful museum. It's going to be incredible when it's finished. So our minds are on architecture. And for all of us, we're aware of the homes, the houses that we live in, the environment, the built environment, but we don't always give it a lot of thought. And so this is an opportunity for us to think about the role of architecture in our lives, but particularly in the ritual ceremonial parts of our lives, because with art, that's all we have to go with for the most part, are the stone monuments that have survived eons of time. So the emphasis is going to be on architecture rather than iconography or the wonderful narrative stories that flush out the architecture. We're going to sort of look at the bones of the architecture. And we're going to focus, at least I am today, on the architecture, particularly of northern India, starting with the early Buddhist works through to early Hindu works. And with that, I want to get started. And as you see, we have dear Ganesha, who I'm sure most of you are very familiar with, who sits on, or has been sitting at the top of the third floor, welcoming everyone who comes into to the museum, essentially on the third level. And it's a place where I take all my students. It doesn't matter whether that's we're looking at Chinese or Japanese or Korean art or whatever. We always go up there and pay our respects to Ganesha, because he's the one who removes obstacles, who paves the way. he makes life a bit easier. Whenever anything is happening, one goes to Ganesha. And if you've just have bought a house and you want it to be really good, go ask Ganesha to bless it. New car, same thing. Taking exams and tests, same thing. So Ganesha is the one we go to who is acknowledged at all beginnings: musical performances, dance performances, literary performances. So here he is welcoming all of us, our own really precious, very beautiful image of him. So the topic of my talk really is to look at the architecture that is the bones, the structure upon which the sculpture appears. We're very familiar with odd pieces of sculpture, some really beautiful pieces, but they are not the most important aspect of the monument. The monument itself is really, really important. And there's a saying, actually, an architect was saying in India that a building without its adornments, its decorations, its sculptures, is like a king without his jewels. Or we might say now a woman without her jewels, but if you've seen the Altani collection, you know it is a king without his jewels. And so we've been looking at all the jewels that are laid upon the architecture for the glory of the gods. And the gods are looking down onto the temples, the stupas or whatever. And the architecture itself is just covered with this lace of beautiful devas, apsaras, gods, you name it, for the glory, their glory, for the gods to appreciate it. So if we're going to be looking at architecture, we have to sort of begin at the beginning. And I just want to start with how I sort of got interested in the topic for this with talking with Anne and Larry, because I'm not an architectural historian. I definitely include architecture. But not long ago, Raj Desai, one of our most beloved supporters of the museum and society, shared with me a favorite party joke. And he said to me, what has India contributed to the development of the human race? And of course, I immediately thought, oh my goodness, Buddhism, Hinduism, Sikhism, Jainism, the great philosophers, and looked at me, nothing. Literally nothing. He said, nothing. Zero. Well, this is really important because India has contributed some of the most outstanding mathematicians in world history. And the mathematicians that we know of go back to like 500 BCE, and they have been playing with the ideas of the meaning of existence, how we come to be, but through a formal logic. And so there's a whole chronology of India's mathematicians going back, as I say, at least 4,000 years. We've got Aryabhata, who lived during the Gupta period, Brahmagupta. We're talking about mathematics, geometry, the circle and the square. And here are just a handful of the great mathematicians. And particularly Brahmagupta, this one, let's see, whoops. Okay, let's see, okay. Brahmagupta here, he discovered the concept of zero in arithmetic. He was followed by Bhaskara, who developed the decimal system with a circle for zero. Now, these are fundamental things that we couldn't live without. I mean, it's the base of our logic. And then there was Mohenjo-Daro, who developed the volume of the sphere. And you may ask, well, where am I going with all of this? Well, a couple of years ago, there was a movie was called The Man Who Knew Infinity. It was the story of the life of Srinivasa Ramanujan, who lived during the British Raj. And that was the end of the 19th and into the early 20th century. He was a brilliant mathematician who had virtually no formal mathematical education at all. He lived in South India, and he essentially taught himself the theory of numbers by sitting on the temple floor and making numbers and designs on the sand on the floor. So it was very simple. He was a brilliant student. He came to the attention of several of his grammar school teachers. He then came to the attention of the British residents, who was blown away by him, introduced him, or wrote to J.H. Hardy at Cambridge and said, "This man is brilliant." And Hardy invited him to Cambridge, and there he was declared one of the most significant mathematicians ever. And I'm going to, as you see up here, this is the movie poster for The Man Who Knew Infinity, played by Dev Patel. He's absolutely gorgeous, and he played Ramanujan. And Jeremy Irons, who played Hardy. It's a very moving movie, and I highly recommend it. Let's see. Here is actually a photograph of him. Oh, I don't have to walk. I think I can. Okay. And here he is with his colleagues at Cambridge, and even in India, he's on a stamp here. They have a National Mathematics Day. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we had something like that here? An acknowledgement of it. So this sort of brings me to where we're going with all of this, because India has an oral tradition. We have no written texts until the 10th, 11th century. All knowledge was passed down from guru to shishu, from teacher to student, orally, from father to son. And it wasn't until the 12th, 13th century that were discovered a palm leaf text, and this is a palm leaf here and here, that was actually written in Orissa, but we think the information definitely can spill over to the architecture we're going to be looking at. And we have for the first time a record of the building of one of the great Orissan temples at Bhubaneswara. Here you see an image of a man. He is the architect. He's holding a triangle, and he's measuring his metered staff here. And here are some of his calculations. And then this is actually a shikara, or a tower, on its side. So you'd have to sort of turn this over so that this is the top of the tower, obviously dedicated to Shiva with his trident here. And at the bottom is this plan. I superimpose this here because we have the square and the circle with the triangles in the center. But at the base of all temples is the mandala. And the mandala consists of concentric circles and squares. And so understanding that, or realizing that there is the mandala. Mandala just in normal usage just means circle, but in a ritual sense, it's the sacred circle. But these plans were often drawn in the ground, or often on a piece of bark, and they were laid ritually on the ground in the center where a building would be then erected over it. It was a way of summoning the forces of the earth and the gods to make the building successful, if you will. So I want to begin at the beginning. And my beginning is actually going to be in China as opposed to India, because it's actually clearer, it's more logical. India is very abstract with their notions of creation. And so when I was thinking about this, I spent quite a bit of time up in Utah. I have been out and let's see, we've got here. This is the spiral jetty that extends out into the Great Salt Lake. And it's a very mystical experience. It's quite a hike to get there. You drive over rough roads, and then eventually you get there, and it's on like the northeast part of the Great Salt Lake. And you look out to the Salt Lake. Okay, here, I'm getting all these things. And there was a jetty there that was constructed in the 19th century. And then Robert Smithson added this spiral of rocks and stones. And in low tide, you can actually walk around it. Well, when it's sort of in the summer, you can walk out there. Otherwise, it's almost submerged. But there's something about the power of this installation, the recognition of the earth, the world, and also the silence. Salt doesn't encourage a lot of life. You know, it's not a place where there are a lot of animals around, and that it's almost a deathly silence there. And I'm sure many of you have been there. So with that idea of the spiral, the eternal, it's constantly changing, that movement, we come to think about the great cosmos. And here is a picture of the cosmos. And the interpretation in China was that chaos reigns in the cosmos. And it's important to bring this chaos into some sort of order. So on one hand, you've got the circular movement of the cosmos, the world, which can be translated as chaos. And on the other hand is that great human need to bring structure to this circular chaos. Well, in China, what we have up here is chaos in the center, here. And then every so many mega years, the emperor of the north, known as Hu, and the emperor of the south, known as Shu, would come together at times of lightning and thunder in order to bring some sort of order to chaos. And eventually they did this, and out of this order was born Pangu. Now, Pangu managed to separate the elements of chaos into the light, pure elements that we know as yang, and the heavy, dark elements that are known as yin. The yang and the yin. Let's see. And then, having sort of separated these elements, he lived for 18,000 years or thereabout. But what I really am taken by is that he then made the eyes, his eyes became the sun and the moon, his breath became the atmosphere, his bones, the mountains, the flesh and the soil. His blood was the rivers and the oceans. His hair, the forest and meadows. Sweat was the rain. Voice was thunder. So here we've got a wonderful image of the creation of the universe and the creation of the world. And then we have the fleas and the lice. And what do you think they are? Yes, thank you. Yeah, they're humans. They are us and the animals that inhabit the earth. And so it gives a logic, but it gives a logic that explains natural phenomena. And that's what's really important. Here we see the Tai Chi symbol, the yin-yang, where constant change is inevitable. And it's that constant change that has to be taken care of. So moving forward, I'd want to go to the Neolithic period in China just briefly, to the Yangshao period, and to a site known as, let's go back here, it is this one here, Yangshao to Banpo, and there's another one here at Banshan. So we're going to go to Banpo just briefly. And in the 1950s, the archaeological site was discovered, a lot of work was done. They found this small town area that had been set up that is filled of beautiful ceramic urns. We've got several of them in our own collection here at the museum. But you can definitely see already there is a form of structure, of order. And we've got also evidence here that the earliest form of settlement were people who actually lived in what they call pit dwellings. I'm sorry, I'm still getting this thing back here. So the pit dwellings were literally pits in the ground, in the floor. If we think about what is it we need to survive? Well, first of all, it is water, it is food, it is security, covering, some sort of cover to protect us, a house, a pit, or whatever. So by the Yangshao period, the civilization had developed to, they had plenty of water sources coming from the Yellow River. Also, they had food, there was plenty of animals, and they dug pits in the ground, as you see here. And then they covered the tops where these would be wooden timbers, and then they covered that with clay that had been brought up from the river banks. So here we see a succession of the development of these pit dwellings. Now these are artist rendition. I took these at the museum in Banpo, so hence my flash is sort of down here. But I thought it was very instructive because this is where people lived. It was safe, it was warm. They could be outside during the daylight, and for the most part, they were oriented to the south, to the area of the sun. The sun would come in and warm them. They built fires, as we can see inside here, and then the top is like a teepee. The smoke could come out of the top. And then this is a succession of developments. This way, it was more above ground, and this way, they had sort of a round ground plan. Ultimately, we have a raised house. Now, of course, I am shortening this and contracting the development very quickly, but I want to give you sort of an idea of how things evolved. And we're so fortunate to have this at Banpo because it tells us a lot about what probably was the situation in India. So in India, now we were over here in China, but in India, during the Indus Valley period, we have settlements that settled along the Indus Valley, particularly here, Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa up here. These are two sites almost identical that have given name to this period. And let's see. Oops, sorry. Okay. here, this was a reference to the Indian golden egg. This was one of their many creation myths, and I'm actually going to sort of skip that over that to bring you to the natural phenomenon of India, the mountains, the rivers, the trees, and back to Mohenjo-Daro. And here, now we have a settled society around 2000, 3000 to around 1900 BCE. And you can see the foundations of buildings and some roadways. There were two areas which were important on the top of two raised areas. One was, I'm sorry about this. Okay. Here, this one, let's see, up here. This is on the top of one of the hills. This is on top of the other. They've been called assembly halls, granaries, stairs, colleges. We don't know exactly what they were, but they're definitely right here was an area that seemed to have a Buddhist stupa, so that must have come quite a bit later. What is really fascinating, though, about both Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa is that the houses were built along streets. Here, this is street number 1, street number 2, street number 3, all oriented north and south, which allowed the air, the prevailing breezes, the winds that would come in during the afternoons, like we have prevailing winds that come in to the Bay Area in the afternoons, around, well, anywhere from 2, 3 o'clock, going up to about 5 or 6 o'clock, coming from the ocean, from the west. They understood the importance of clearing the air, particularly in the sort of the humid environment, hot, humid environment. The other thing is that the houses themselves had raised walls, and they were arranged around courtyards. And you've got various other ones, which is a form of architecture that is still used in many areas in India today and throughout Asia. This is a very tidy looking archaeological work, a survey of one of the areas in Mohenjo-Daro. And what is interesting is between the houses, you've got these like backs of houses here, and the streets would be on the other side. You've got here a drainage. They knew about the importance of sanitation and hygiene. Here's another one, and you can see they actually covered the drainage over here as well. So these now streets and the buildings are made of baked bricks. So they've already understood how to move from wood to clay. And this is a reconstructed walls, so you can see the walls go up quite high, and these are some of the bricks. So all of this has been, this work is done in the early 20th century by the Archaeological Survey of India and Pakistan. So now trying to sort of come up more to the time that we're interested in coming to something more tangible. Now what we are coming to is the time of the Buddha. There was a great lacuna from around 1500 to 500 BCE where there's great inundations in the Indus Valley area that wiped out the civilization there. We know virtually nothing about what happened in that 1,000 years. But in the 6th century BCE, the Buddha was born, Prince Siddhartha Gautama, and he preached, as many of you know, a way of coming to the realization of the inevitability of suffering and change. Change, movement. And supposedly, and of course this is all hypothetical now, that he taught and would explain things just like Ramanujan by making circles in the dust or in the sand on the ground And one of the most important was the mandalas that he made. And he said these sacred diagrams should underlie mounds, burial mounds, that would be built or erected over the remains or the cremated ashes of important people, of the chieftains, of the Buddhist priests, or, well, it was later the Buddhist priests. And what has struck me is this is a beautiful parlor image of the seated Buddha in the earth-touching gesture, the Vipassana mudra, and it's in our own collection here in San Francisco. And what he's doing, of course, is calling the earth to witness his enlightenment. But I'm also suggesting he's also touching the earth, and he's drawing, because that is how he was a teacher. He was explaining through visual methods, making marks. And that essentially is what he's doing. He's making a mark. He's actually calling, yes, but he's still making a mark. And I think this is perhaps what underlies the Buddhist stupas. So the mandalas, a yantra is a diagram. So Shri, the honorable, the beautiful yantra, the yantra is the diagram that underlies the mandala. So these are all sort of Sanskrit words that come from, that explain the mathematical circle and square, and in this case, because it's the Shri or yantra, and of course I put this up for a purpose, it's the yantra of the female, the women, and so it's represented by the triangles. And you can see there's consecutive circles, and that, of course, refers to the sacred circle, which, of course, is the great cosmos. At times of great tragedy, trauma, etc., people will very often seek assistance. They will seek help from deities, whatever one's persuasion is. And during the time of the destruction of the Bamiyan caves, these beautiful Buddhist caves in Afghanistan by the Taliban, right after that, they were destroyed in 2001, in 2002. Some of my students had met with some Tibetan Buddhist priests in Berkeley and asked me if we might invite them to Mills. So I looked into it, and we did. And we invited a group of Tibetan monks who resided with us for 10 days at Mills, and they made this sand mandala. So all of this is grains of sand. And the students would come and watch. The monks themselves actually made it. But it was done at a time of great sort of trauma. We couldn't believe that what was really happening was so senseless. And we were studying Buddhist art at the time. And this, as many of you know, and who were my students way, way, way back, I don't want to say how long back, I had a project of asking all of you to make mandalas as well, so that it would give you an understanding of the esoteric nature of what mandalas really are. They're not sort of popular culture by any means. Every single color here, east, south, west, north, always entered from the east. The direction, each of the Buddhas holding their hands in a specific mudra, each color, everything is very important. And of course, you've got the great cosmos, the circle, and then the square, which lends structure. The meta-geometry of the Buddhists is the circle. The meta-geometry for Hindus, though, is the square. This is an image of the Buddha, Gandharan image, at his nirvana, and he was cremated. His ashes and bone splinters were fought over by several chieftains. There was a great battle for the relics, and then they were divided into 8 pieces or 8 mounds, as we see here, and given to the chieftains of the 8 most significant areas where the Buddha had preached during his lifetime. And then over these mounds, and this is going back to the words of the Buddha, that the ashes of the faithful should be covered by a mound. So this, This is a mound here of just rocks that have been gathered that was placed over, obviously, an important chieftain from Kyrgyzstan in Central Asia. But it forms the basis of the stupas. Now, stupas were, as I've said, were distributed or mounds around India, particularly in areas where he'd spent a considerable amount of time. Today, we're going to look at Sanchi. We're going to go, it's almost in the center of India, right here, just sort of south of the Gangetic Plain. And Sanchi is positioned on the top of a small hill. Sometimes they call it a mountain. It's not, it's just a hill. And it's got sort of 2 raised areas very close to Vidisha. Vidisha was a very important trading town. There were the confluence of 2 important rivers, and then there were 2 caravan sites, trade routes that actually crossed north, south, east, west, right at Vidisha. It was also a place where Ashoka, the first emperor of India, lived, or visited, I should say, and he married the daughter of a wealthy banker from Vidisha. And so it's a very special place, but it doesn't actually have any connection specifically with the Buddha. It's not, probably he didn't visit here at all. But when we go up the hill, and I know I've been here with several of you on one of our visits, when you go up the hill, the first thing one sees is the sacred tree. And I did show briefly the sacred tree as, in the introduction. And so here, the tree gives shelter, the tree is of the earth, the tree is where the spirits live. And whenever, like, architects would cut down trees or have trees cut down, according to the early texts in India, they would actually cover the circumference of the trunk with honey. And they would also recite prayers to the spirit of the trees. And it reminds me very much of the kami in Japan, that same acknowledgement of the power of nature, the beauty of nature, of life. And this is how India sort of looks at the greater forces of nature. So here, of course, it's under the tree, the Bodhi tree, that the Buddha sat when he was enlightened. So one pays one's respect to the tree that is marked by the Vedika, the fence, the sacred fence. There are scarves hanging from it. People tie little bits of stone and then throw it over the branches as a sort of auspicious offering. So, Sanchi, as I've mentioned, is an important area. And you can see that once upon a time, it was very active. In the foreground is the main stupa. It's a really big stupa. And then there are several much smaller stupas. So it's not the only stupa there at all. Okay, so we'll start with Stupa 3. And Stupa 3, I like it because it's been rebuilt, and it's a very complete work, very clean, very easy to look at. It is composed of the central dome It's got the fencing, the Vedika. It has a gateway in front of it. It's also got the Harmika and the Chatras above. And let's go here. So it's the classic form of a stupa. The interior is solid. You cannot go inside the stupa. It's filled with stone and rubble. And that's another reason why I showed you that piece from Turkestan, because that's what the center of the stupas are. It's on an elevated platform, sometimes known as the drum. This is the under, which translates under is like the egg. I mean, it has the possibility of growth, and it also refers to the great cosmos. The Harmika is a square. So you've got the circle and the square. It's usually a little a fencing high up, and the Harmika houses the relics. And then at the top we get the yasti, which is like the tree, and the chatras, or the umbrellas, which indicate the Buddhist heavens, but also the royalty of the Buddha. The Buddha was the son of a king. He was a prince. He can't deny that, and that's being acknowledged right here. So just showing you this here. You've got the I've just marked everything out, and I think this will be on the recording that Coral will be doing, and that you'll have access to. So I've made a lot of notes on slides that, you know, when you look at it later, you can have reference to them. The other fascinating thing about stupas is that they grow. And they sort of remind me rather like of sort of onions. But instead of they don't grow from the in out, they grow from the out in. And it's very auspicious to add to a stupa. And we know that around 150 BCE, the Shunga king actually added, doubled in size, the great stupa here. And so this is what you see, the original stupa. Then we've got a smaller stupa add, and then a third stupa on top of that. And a good example of all of this, if you go to Thailand or to Burma, you will see a lot of growing stupas there still. This, just back to 3 is here, which we were looking at it from the south. And I just wanted to show you stupa 4, because you can see the solid interior of the stupa. Now, I want to just go down the hill. The ones that we've been looking at, 3 and 4, were just here. And we're just going to walk down the hill. These are gradient lines, so we're just going to walk down to Stupa 2, which is known as the Stupa of the Saints. And it's called this because when the reconstruction was going on, 3 caskets were found embedded in the body of the stupa. And they, each of the caskets had the bones and ashes of various Buddhist priests who'd obviously been associated with this site. They were taken back to England. Medical tests were run on them, so we managed to get dates on all of them. And I'm not sure whether they did the DNA testing on it, but they've returned the ashes to Sanchi, and they're in a site museum just at the bottom of the hill now. So this is the so-called Stupa of the Saints. And you can see it got on sort of an ashlar finish here, which would have had a plaster over it. Then this is another closer view in which you can see there's a gateway entrance here, a gateway here, and then there's one on the other side. But always approached from the east, sometimes from the south. Now, in the approach, you see the gateway has a zigzag. You know, you come here, and you go round, and then you perform pradakshina pata, which is circumambulation with your right shoulder to the monument. And let's see, if one looks at the ground plan now, it is a circle. The Harmika is in the center, which would be the receptacle for the remains. But what is really interesting is this zigzag of the entranceway, which actually forms the image of the swastika. And I know that the swastika has unfortunate memories for us, but it actually is a Sanskrit word. It's a very auspicious symbol from swasti, which the sandhi of Sanskrit means essentially something beautiful, being. So it's something that is beautiful, and it refers to the sun. And it's in Hinduism and Buddhism, it refers to the course of the sun, which is in the clockwise direction. So that is what we are seeing here, is this movement of the sun in this circular way. And so here, you come in, and then you can circumambulate around this way. There's also another popular myth that they designed the gates this way in order to foil demons. Demons can only travel in straight lines. I don't know how they turn their corners, but they go in straight lines, so they would come down the hill and they would be blocked there, or if they came around there, they would be blocked here. So it's a combination of both ritual and other interpretations. So I think I'm getting the... Right now? Okay. All right, so let's have a look. I'm just going to show you some slides very quickly because we've gone a bit slow. Okay. I just wanted to show you the big stupa here, which was enlarged. It has, let's see, okay, it also has the ground plan. Originally there was an Ashokan column right here, and this was the capital, which is down in the museum. So this is evidence that Ashoka was in this area, and here is the close-up in the site museum of this beautiful lion capital, very similar to the Sarnath capital. Let's see, I'm just running through these very quickly. Just shut your eyes if it's too fast. Beautiful yakshi. All the sculpture is on the outside for the glory, not only of the gods, but for everyone else. And there's a yakshi actually missing some of the appendages at the Boston Museum, so from Sanchi. This is what it looked like when it was first discovered. And I just want to briefly just take you up into Nepal, to the Himalayas, to the stupas up there, which are actively in worship now, because the Tibetans who came from, or pushed out of China in 1957 with the Communist Revolution, fled China, came up into the Himalayas, and the Tibetans then, of course, were pushed out and went to Nepal and down into northern India. And what is distinctive is you see the eyes of the stupa, otherwise completely solid. This is it about 20 years later. I've been there several times, and you can see it's grown, and it's changed as well. Here they are, side by side, same place. The eyes have been repainted, and who knows, maybe there were eyes on the original stupa at Sanchi. We have no evidence, but we can sort of guess. And the most beautiful of all, and there are many stupas here, is the Bodhnath stupa in Kathmandu. And I just wanted to show you the ground plan. We have the stupa here, and these are the terraces, the square upon square terraces of the stupa. You see the eyes looking out into the four directions. And this is an aerial view of the stupa from above. So I'm going to leave you at that because we're going to go on to Hinduism. Question actually over the break. What happened to the square? Well, we're going to find out, because the metageometry for the Hindus is the square, whereas the metageometry for the Buddhists is the circle. And I was sort of thinking about it. The square imposes structure. It gives a foundation. And growing up in England, we had a term, like she's square. You know, it was someone who wasn't really with it, or who, you know, really wasn't terribly relaxed, and we'd call them square. And I never even thought about it, actually, until this morning, driving here. It was, my God, the square. Yeah, it does impose some sort of rigidity, and it cannot be changed. The square is governed by the length of one line. So anyway, just a little aside. So we're going to go down briefly to South India, to a beautiful place called Mamallapuram, and I know I visited Mamallapuram with several of you on one of our trips. It's right on the Bay of Bengal, on the east coast, central east coast of India. And what we are seeing here, this is Bengal, the bay right here. It is filled, this whole area, let's see, okay, Mamallapuram is down here. We were up here at Sanchi, we've just come right down here, just about 30 miles south of Madras or Chennai. This is the actual site, and we're looking, this is the Bay of Bengal, and there are these amazing rock-cut pieces here. I don't know whether to call them sculpture, architecture, monuments. It could be any of it. But the reason for their being there is this beautiful granite, enormous boulders of granite. You see just everywhere, you see the granite, and it just seems quite natural for the Indian craftsmen, the Sherpas, to carve into them. And I've always felt that latent in almost every Indian craftsman is a Michelangelo, but they're all anonymous. We don't know who their names are. But all the beautiful sculpture that they do is they inherently know how to work with stone, and this is no exception. I'm showing you this one here because, as we can see, it again is one of the boulders. But what's interesting to me is this grid. And the grid, again, is a form, it's a square that has been divided up into smaller squares, and this would be drawn on the surface of the rocks and then carved out, and different parts of either the sculpture or a column or whatever would be fashioned from the basic grid here. Obviously, at one point, this was a barrel-shaped roof. They had thought that maybe they were going to carve or place some temple up there, which didn't come to be. But in any event, this is sort of a little to the side. If one goes to Mamallapuram, stonemasons are still working in the same way that they have worked for 2,000 years. They're still there. And this is on one of the roads. You can, sorry, you see them here. These are their shacks that they both live in and work from, and they're here. Here is just with a hammer and chisel working a piece of stone. Here's a whole lot of them, and then look in the back here, you've got some finished sculptures. So when everyone wonders, is this authentic or not? Well, it's authentically Indian. You're really asking, does it go back several hundred or thousand years? And that, of course, is the big question. And stylistically, there's always little hints. But anyway, here they are working away. You even have contemporary pieces as well. And if we want, in the background, you have, this looks like an image of possibly Vishnu back there. And two of them working on the same image. And it's not just one person on one image. Most of the craftsmen specialized in hands, feet, noses, or whatever, and they'd work together because they work in a guild. And many of you may be familiar with this, the great bas-relief, the descent of the Ganges, where the water pours down during the monsoon period here. But again, I'm not discussing the iconography. What I am interested in, again, is this grid here. That I'm assuming that originally this was actually drawn or painted on, obviously washed away. But that grid was underlying the formation or the sculptures here, and you can see some of the grid up here, so it's obviously unfinished. So it gives us an insight of how the craftsmen actually worked. It's still very old ways of moving earth. They don't have all the great tractor trailers and everything that we have in other parts of the world. They do in some of the cities, but not in the more remote areas. And one of the things I love about India is color. I mean, when we're looking at the sculptures, the other thing is most of the sculptures were actually painted, rather like the Greek sculptures as well. And there's a beauty to the stone that I absolutely love. But when I see these colors, it's just extraordinary. And they seem to put together colors so beautifully and so naturally. Anyway, there's a group of these granite boulders that have been carved out of the stone. The water, the Bay of Bengal, is just back here. This is sand. And when they were discovered in the 19th century, there was just the tip of them showing. So all of this has been excavated down. This is just a ground plan. And what I want to show you here is the ground plan now is square, or rectangular, square, square. Well, this one's got curved back to it, but mostly it is square. We're moving away from the circle. These are known as rattas. Ratta means like a chariot. This is called the Draupadi Shrine. It has actually no resemblance to the Durga that is inside. So these names have sort of been given to these monuments later on. But what I am interested in is that this is a square building on a square plinth, and it's got walls that also form the square, and the garbhagriha, or the womb chamber, the cellar, is inside here. Also, what is interesting is the roof that, of course, is all carved out of one piece of stone. There's nothing additive here, but it resembles that of a thatched roof. So it's a clue that people thatched their roofs. All the materials were, of course, very vulnerable, and they've all disappeared, the wood, the cane, etc. But the stone has been preserved. Here, the Draupadi is next to the Arjuna Ratta, and again, you can see it's built on a square with a rising sort of tower, and the top is sort of a circle. It's segmented, and it's known as a stupika. So the term stupa actually is an architectural term that means a mound, and stupika is like a little mound, if you will, on the top. And then at the far end of these boulders is the largest of the rattas, known as the Dharmaraja Ratta. It's dedicated to Shiva, but of course it's solid. It's solid stone, all carved from the existing granite, and it's got sort of terraced terraces leading up. As you can see here, the stupika at the top, but the ground plan is square. So here, just a close-up of the upper terraces of the tower, very typical of South Indian or Dravidian style architecture, where the emphasis is actually on the horizontal. When we get to Carajo, the emphasis will be on the vertical. So this is a ground plan of the Dharmaraja stupa, and here we can see, let's see, this is the ground plan here. This is a section showing it, another section. But this is a view from the top, looking down. So this is the Stupa, which essentially is the center of the mandala. And then you've got the square sort of terraces going all the way around, which has the little huts building right up to the top. But the emphasis here now is quite different from the sort of roaming circle that we had before. So here, what we've got now is moving from the circle to the square that encircles or confines, holds in the circle, and then in the very center would be the womb chamber. So I'm moving quite swiftly on here to Deogar, which is not far from Sanchi. This map makes it look quite far, but it's actually just a matter of about 50 miles. So right in the center of India. Mamallapuram was down here, Sanchi. And this is the earliest Hindu monument, extant Hindu monument that we have. Again, it's constructed now, or not again, it's constructed. It is Hindu, it's based on a square, and it's constructed, whereas the stupa was piled up, you might say. And what we have is a square building with the entranceway standing on a raised plinth, and there's evidence that on each of the four corners were small little shrines. There's a large relief here, there's one on the back here and one on the other side, and it's oriented to the west. So this is the ground plan, and you can see here, it's a square, the small little shrines echo the main square. And this is the Garbhagriha, which is the most sacred area, the womb chamber, right in the very center. The bindu, the spot, the energy, the cell, you might say, entered though from the west. And this is a bit of a problem. Now, just to compare, the Buddhist monuments are centered on the circle, the Hindu monuments on the square. But each of them have an aspect of the other in them, and they work together in this way. I wanted to show you, though, what it was like right in the very center of the Garbhagriha, of the womb chamber. Most womb chambers or shrines are no more than 4 to 5 or 6 feet square. So square, it would be a cube square sides. So it's very small and very dark. And if it's dedicated to Shiva, as this cave is here, you have a Shiva linga. And so this is the most sacred symbol of Shiva. If this was like that beautiful image of Vishnu, actually Vishnu would be standing. He would be on the back wall. Otherwise, the chamber is exactly the same. But I wanted to give you a sense of how we should really look at a lot of the sculptures that we see. We've got Shivalingas both from Nepal and the Gupta one just standing, or one is standing in the middle of Buddhist stuff, which doesn't make any sense. But that was, hopefully everything will be rearranged when we redo the galleries. But thinking about installation, thinking about how people will look at these objects and trying to give them a sense of place, I think is really important. Now, as one walks around, there is this beautiful sculpture of Vishnu in his cosmic sleep. And here you can see him reclining on Ananta. Ananta is the serpent, which is serpent of eternity, and then various other figures. But really what I wanted to draw your attention to was our friend, Ganesha, who is right here on this pillar, and this is on the south face. And here is the close-up of Ganesha, dear little Ganesha. Now, Ganesha, as I've said, removes obstacles. He makes our path easy. He directs us. and he directs us around the monuments. So what is he doing? Going in Prashalya, which is the anti-clockwise direction, which is not at all auspicious. We don't know. It's been thought that maybe this temple was a memorial temple. It might have been erected in remembrance of someone, but we've no evidence. So, as I was saying, actually Ganesha is right here. This is the big relief of Vishnu. This is the entrance. And so the circumambulation is going anti-clockwise this way. It should really be faced to the east, if it was really auspicious, or the south, but definitely not to the west. But we don't know why. I mean, there's, I can get into a lot of sort of debate about it, but not here. But things do happen, and maybe it's a local aberration. Now, with the square, what we have, well, we still are in a period where this is all oral, but we know from the Gupta period onwards that the Vastu Purusha Mandala was an architectural text, an oral text to begin with, that described the basis of building. And they used the grid system, the square grid system. This is a very simple grid system. This one here on the left has, 8 padas. Each of these squares is a pada, essentially a foot, pedestrian. Just think of so many of our words are Sanskrit-based. This one over here is 9. It's 9 padas across. But what is really important is that Brahma, the universal supreme energy force, is at the center and then surrounded by 4 other gods and then lesser gods. So each of these squares is the domain of a Hindu god. And we are now we've left Buddhism behind, we're now strictly in Hinduism. And what struck me when I was sort of looking at these plans is that the Deogar plan fits beautifully into the 8-pada grid system based on the square. So you can see very distinctly that affinity. So obviously there was a mandala made on the ground with squares and circles placed underneath the initial building. Okay, so it's a very simple beginning. We still don't have any text, but time is somewhat limited, so we're going to move from Deogar up to one of the most amazing sites in India, and that is Carajo, which is it's not just north, it's about 100 miles north of Deogar. And here we see some truly outstanding architecture that for the first time we actually have texts that tell us something about who the builders were. These were the Chandela kings who were ruling in the sort of east central area of India. India is made up of many states. It's rather like Europe. They're independent states with their own sovereignty. And there's constant warfare going on between all of the Indian rajas at this time. And also what we're starting to have is trading contacts with the West. There's always been trade. I mean, we've got evidence of this going back to the Roman times. But we've also, what is starting to happen, and I can see it because of the scientific developments, particularly in math and medicine, is that things start to get written down on these palm leaf manuscripts, these palm leaves, and that means this information is preserved. Whereas if by oral tradition, things change. We're in that circular sort of constant movement. Did Dad really say that? Did he really mean this screw to go here? Did he really want us to hammer in here, chisel this nose off, whatever it is? That's in the oral tradition. But in the written tradition, there's constant references. And now we're moving into that with these splendid works at Carajo. So this is the Sherpa Shastras, these early medieval architectural texts give us a lot of information about the mandalas that form the basic diagrams. But they also give us information about costs, how much it costs, where the trees are coming from, where the stones are coming from, and also it tells us about the people who are working on it, the Sherpas, the craftspeople, the guild system. Suddenly, we're in a different world. And we get information about the patrons. Who were the people who put up the money for all this? Who wanted to preserve their memory in these magnificent temples? And a lot of it is not just on the palm leaves, but it's also written, engraved in stone on the buildings themselves. So here's a palm leaf text. It's actually, okay, it's a Buddhist text, but I wanted to give you an example of what a palm leaf text looks like, because I throw these terms around and it may not mean anything to you, but these are palm leaves that are treated, they're dried and treated, and then written on, incised and ink pressed in with the text, and in this instance there are images. And then they are tied together. There are holes in the leaves, in the center of the leaves here and here, and then they're tied together, and there are wooden ends, bookends, on either side. So very simple, and they're painted or written on both sides of the leaf. Hence, this is the text that I showed you to begin with, and it is a palm leaf text. You see the, the architect here, the pillar or the tower over here, and the actual ground plan. I'd superimposed on that other slide the diagram of the circle of the square, but this is the complete leaf here, showing the mandala that really is underneath, at the base, that's calling on the powers of the earth and the powers of the heaven for this successful building. Oops. Okay. So, how did the square come to be? This is the Vastu Purusha mandala, and there was this myth or this belief that there was chaos reigning. And how did we contain the chaos? Well, Brahma decided that things had to be controlled, and he called together essentially the gods, and they imposed on this chaos that was separating the heavens and the earth, and it had no real shape or being, and they had to take care of this. So they imposed this grid, this square, on this amorphous being and squashed it into the square, essentially, and they pressed it down. So what you're looking at is the back of Purusha. So this is the back, this is the back of his head, the back of his ears, and so this essentially should be the center, and his feet together. So he has been squashed down, but at the very center is Brahman. Brahman, the universal power, the universal spirit. And this is the mandala that underlies the majority or all the Hindu buildings. So I showed you this last time, when I was talking about Deogar, and talking about the padas. And here you can see Brahma is in the middle here, surrounded by gods, and then there'll be multiple other gods. And that is essentially what we have here. Brahma is in the center here. We've got the main gods, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you've got all of the other gods, all again oriented to the cardinal points, north, south, east, and west. And it brought to mind Leonardo's work, and he based his work on Vitruvius, who was a Greek architect. And looking at the ideal man as the measure of all things. So Vitruvius was taking man and starting like essentially with the navel, extending the arms and the feet, and then of course you've got the head and the legs and everything, and using the square and the circle to make the perfect forms. And this is Leonardo's drawing of the Vitruvian man that you see here. And then he wrote his thesis on the divine proportions. And the divine proportions, they're architectural proportions that derive from the centrality of the human being. So in the West, we have a more secular approach, you might say, and even our creation myth of God the Father, that essentially is that of the creator of the human being. In the East, there is an acknowledgement of something greater, something more unruly. But in each instance, it has to be controlled. And this is, of course, one of the brilliant treatises that Leonardo wrote on, and I'm not going to talk about Renaissance art right now, but I think the parallels are really important and interesting if we think about them. So this brings me back to Carajo, back up here. Carajo is a small village, actually, a very small village, for those of you who visited. It's right here, very, very modest. You can fly in now. The first time I used to go, I actually had to fly on an Air Force plane that would take us in, or we'd have to go by bus. And it was like an overnight bus with all the chickens and everything else. There were no trains or anything. But now they've realized what an incredible treasure they have, and they want the world to come there, so making it a little easier to get there. Originally, this was the sacred center for the Chandelas. And we have evidence of over 80 temples that were erected here. They were principally Hindu, but there were some Jain temples as well. They were dedicated to Shiva and to Vishnu, and then to the Mahavira and the Jain deities. So the interesting thing, though, is that they're all very similar. So I don't want you to get overwhelmed by names because it almost becomes irrelevant after a while. They are all on essentially the same ground plan that grows. It's quite modest to begin with, but then it grows. And so let's see, the village is here, there are some Jain temples here, there's some Hindu temples here, more here. The goddess shrine is something else entirely. We won't go into that right now. So I want to start with the Vamana temple that is dedicated to Vishnu in his dwarf form. And it's actually an elaboration of what we saw at Deogar. Deogar was we always saw, oh gosh, I'm so sorry. I have a different thing at Mills, and that's why I keep pressing the wrong thing, a different remote. Okay. All we had really left of Deogar was about this much, based on a square. And you can already see this, it looks more complicated. We are assuming, because of the structure, that Deogar also had a tower or a shikara, which might have been rather like this, but there was no evidence of this building. This is a porch or a mandapa, and one approaches the sacred cellar, or the garbhagriha, which is right inside here from the east. So you come up here in through the porch where offerings would be made, and in some instances this is where musicians or dancers would also be performing, and then the sacred shrine in here. The emphasis is on the verticality as opposed to down at Mamallapuram where the emphasis was on the horizontal elements. The top of the shikara, or the the Shikara, the tower here, is held by a stone ring that's called an amlaka. Amlaka is actually like a segmented fruit, sort of rather like an orange, that type of fruit. And so it's just a sort of a popular name. It's taken on architectural significance. And it essentially holds together the stones at the top. And then there's a vessel, kalasha, at the very top here. And this is the mandapa. So in the Garbhagriha is an image of Vishnu as the dwarf. And as I mentioned earlier, if it's the temple's dedicated to Vishnu, he would be standing on the back wall. And that's exactly what you see here. He's standing on the back. There is no linga because it's not dedicated to Shiva. Essentially, this is the plan. So what we see now, and I'm going to be showing you a few diagrams, but they are sort of self-explanatory. Entered from the east, we come to the mandapa, which is here, and then we go on to the Garbhagriha, or the womb chamber, above which rises, go right up to the top. To the top is the tower. And the numbers here refer to the very center is Brahma, and then he's surrounded by the other gods, and each ring has its own radius, filled again with appropriate gods. Actually, you can see here you've got the same gods, Brahma, the supreme principle, and then Aryama, Prativdara, Mitra, and, going around the wrong way. Anyway, these are the four gods. And then you get the outer rings, and then the outer rings are where the asuras are. The asuras are the demons that have to be kept away. So they have the inner rings protect the most sacred area of the buildings. And so here, this relates to the porch area, and this plan of this relates here. So within the grid, the pada system, we also still have the circle. So like with the Buddhist mandalas, you've got the circle and the square inside. Now you've got the square with the circle inside. Okay. And this is one of the most glorious of the temples. We've actually jumped, this is much bigger, this is one that was built in 1050. And now you can see there's a proliferation of porches. And you've got the main porch and another porch here. And it's also got transepts, arms, extending out to the side. Very high platform. And so now we can see the difference, how this, in literally 100 years, this was around 950, this one around 1050. So you can see how it has expanded. It reminds me rather like, well, what San Francisco was like, 50 years ago, now what it's like today. You know, you've suddenly got all these high-rises shooting up, but all building one on the other. Here is a diagram that explains from the relatively simple temple around 950, which is very similar to the one I showed you. This is an aerial view looking down. This is the Shikara. Now we come to one that's 20, 30 years later. You can see now all of these small little shikaras climbing up the main tower, and then we come to the magnificent Lakshmana and Kandaraya Mahadeva temples of the 1050. Also, you can see this is the plan looking from the top down, how elaborate it is, but always still built or designed around the plan. This might also help from the very simple design, the simple square, and these extensions, which are projections of the square, are known as rattas. And of course, and now it gets very complex, but ratta also is that term that is used that describes the chariots of the gods. And a metaphor for these temples is that they carried the gods up to the magical Himalayas. Okay, and here we've got another just a plan. For those of you who are interested in architects or are interested in the actual structure of the building, this is something that you might look at on the screen that Coral is filming for you, because now you can see it very logically. And for those of you who are truly interested, on the study guide, I would highly recommend Volvoisen's book. It's probably out of print. It was written when I was a student, and so it goes back but many years, but you can probably find it on Amazon. I highly recommend that. It's very insightful. And talking of books, I want to thank Larry Mock also for providing me with insights into architecture and the philosophy of architecture. Thank you. Okay, Brahmadan. So this again, playing with the grids. Now, this is something now that I find quite remarkable. At many of the living temple sites, these are Hindu sites, Jain sites. These are living monuments. And what do we have? But on the ground, made out of pigmented chalks, is the mandala. And once the mandala is down there, they just walk over it. It's the making of the mandala. The circle is, of course, constantly changing. Here's another one. And these I took in temples in South India. But you'll find them in most temples that are actively or are in active worship. Now, just getting back to our sequencing, the Javeri temple has the mandapa and the Atta mandapa, which means a half porch. So it's becoming slightly more complex, you might say. This is the entranceway, which has these beautiful lobed carvings over here. We enter in. And this is the image of Vishnu on the very back wall in the Garbhagriha. So you can see him standing there. So imagine the standing, not the seated Vishnus or in one of his manifestations, but the standing images. Those are what we find in the Garbhagrihas. And that's Garuda. That's his mount. Shiva has his bull, Garuda has his mount, and he's right there. Here we go, right inside. And just look at all the complex carving all the way around. Unfortunately, the face has been cut off. Now, the towers are amazing. They climb right up to the top of the Shikara, and you can see the Amlaka holding, it's like this keystone holding all the stones together. But every part of the stone has been carved. There's nothing left uncarved. It's like a web. You can see the little chaityas all the way around. And then these extraordinary apsaras, these devas and devis that are there to glorify the gods. Here you can see them again in the niches between the mandapas and the shikara. And then this is the Kandaraya Mahadeva. Let's see, and some of you may recognize yourselves, back view over here. But what I am actually pointing out is the slope. Actually look at how people are standing. That's really what, it isn't one of these ocular lenses. It is actually built that way so that rain will drain off. And it also accentuates the height. Now, these temples, the Lakshmana and the Kandaraya Mahadeva, have, as I've mentioned, two transepts. One here, and they go right the way across. and multiple porches, as you see here. This is the entranceway. And now, what do we have here? You've got Ganesha. So Ganesha is telling us that circumambulation is pradakshina, going clockwise around. So here's our guide here. And it's remarkable. I mean, here you see him, chubby little fellow. I hope you sort of recognize him, because here is one of our own Ganeshas, and I'm quite sure probably from Carajo itself. And they were on the wall as you go up the escalators to the right as you enter into the main galleries. And then here's the other one. There were two of them on the wall there, as you see. So thinking about context and installation, where did these originally come from? Not in a prominent place at all. They weren't meant to be on mantel shelves or in museums. They were there made to adore the gods. They were there for the enjoyment of the gods. Okay. And here we have another view up the Shikara. I'm going very fast now. The back. Oh, these are overwhelming buildings. They're just magnificent. The ground plan, the double transepts, as I've mentioned, and we've got the multiple porches coming up this way. This will make a little more sense, because you've got the half mandapa, the main mandapa, and the great mandapa, all these porches. And then what I want to draw your attention to is this area here between the cellar, the garbhagriha, and the porches. This is a very vulnerable area, and Shiva Parvati are here, and and Parvati down here. So here you have this great temple dedicated to Vishnu, but calling upon the great Shaivite gods for protection. Another view of the Kandaraya. It's from the back of it, from the side of it. And another view of the plan of the Kandaraya. See, they're almost identical, the plans. They're built at the same time. Again, this is what I want you to look at. Oh, that's inside, that's the linga. But now that area between the transepts is filled with the most extraordinary erotic sculpture. So here, right down here, and these are not the only temples that have sculptures like this at Khajuraho, but they are placed in very significant areas between the transepts. And I could show you some amazing things and some positions that I tell my students, just don't try it, you know. Oh, actually, I should go back one and point out that this is a quite amusing one where you've got to be standing on your head to do it. So, okay. As you can see here, now this is the area that I'm talking about right here. And when we look at the plan, the square plan, what we have are the two squares actually overlap in this area. And whenever you come to a crossroads, a join, it's the most vulnerable area. And this is where the demons can really attack. And so one of the theories is that this erotic work was made in order to distract the demons, whatever. But actually there is a play that was written about this time, and it goes into the role of demons in architecture, and it's very interesting that I think maybe it was actually a drama that is behind these works, but the popular thing is demons. But whatever, they're beautiful works, and some of the most wonderful, most sensual architecture comes from Khajuraho. And I think we're virtually out of time. So what we were looking at is right in here. So when you're looking at so much, you can walk past it unless you really know what you're looking for. Let's see. And so I want to leave you with this sort of image of eternity. We started with Robert Smithson's Salt Lake Spiral Jetty, and this is the Ganges at sunset. Thank you.